Friend, have you ever had your heart ripped out while holding pure joy in your arms? That's what happened to my daughter Sarah on what should have been the happiest day of her life. I watched my son-in-law Thomas hand her divorce papers while she was still in her hospital bed, tubes in her arms, our tubes in our car, and our 4 tiny grandchildren, all born just hours before, sleeping in the nursery down the hall.
I never wanted kids, he said, not even looking at her face. One would have been too many. 4 is impossible. The room felt like all the air had been sucked out. The beeping monitors seemed to get louder, matching my heartbeat that pounded in my ears. The nurse who had just entered dropped her clipboard, her mouth hanging open. She looked at me, at my broken daughter, at the coward who was already backing toward the door. Friend, before I tell you what I did next, what any father would do when seeing his child destroyed like that, tap that subscribe button. Because what happens when a man who abandoned 4 newborn babies tries to crawl back after discovering what he threw away? Well, that's a lesson in karma you won't want to miss. Sarah's face crumpled like paper in a fire. You're leaving us? Now. Her voice was so small, so unlike my strong, brilliant daughter who'd fought through a high-risk pregnancy, who'd endured 3 months of bed rest, who'd survived a terrifying emergency C-section just yesterday. Thomas just shrugged, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. I've already packed my things. The apartment's yours until the lease ends in 2 months. He didn't even look at the photos of the babies on our bedside table. For perfect little miracles, 2 boys and 2 girls, that he was walking away from without a backward glance. I'm an old man now, telling you this story. My wife Jean is long gone. Cancer took her 15 years ago. But standing there in that hospital room, I felt something dark and powerful wake up inside me. Something I hadn't felt since Vietnam, when I watched my brothers fall around me. You don't have to sign anything right now, I told Sarah, my hand on her shaking shoulder. This isn't legal advice. This is father's advice. I turned to Thomas, this man I had welcomed into our family 5 years ago, this man who wore the watch I'd given him as a wedding present. And you might want to leave before I forget I'm in a hospital. The nurse was already reaching for the call button, probably to get security. Thomas smirked, actually smirked, before dropping the thick envelope of papers on Sarah's blanket-covered legs. Your dad can't protect you forever, Sarah. I've got a right to move on with my life. My fingers curled into a fist without my permission. I'm 72 years old, my joints stiff with arthritis, but in that moment, I felt the strength of my youth flood back. The things I want to do to that man would have put me in jail. But Sarah's soft voice stopped me. Dad, don't. He's not worth it. She looked up at me with her mother's eyes, wet with tears but fierce with something else. Pride, maybe. Or determination. What Thomas didn't know, what none of us knew until the call came 3 hours later, would change everything. My phone rang while Sarah was finally sleeping, exhausted from both the birth and the betrayal. The caller ID showed my late father-in-law's attorney. Mr. Miller, the crisp voice said. I've been trying to reach Sarah. Is she with you? She's resting. I answered, stepping into the hallway. She just had the babies. Babies? As in plural. Quadruplets, I said, a grandfather's pride momentarily pushing through my anger. 4 perfect little ones. The silence on the other end stretched for a moment. Well, the attorney finally said, that makes what I have to tell her even more significant. Her grandfather's will has finally cleared probate. As his only living descendant, Sarah is the sole heir to his estate. My heart skipped a beat. Jean's father had been wealthy, sure. He owned some real estate, had some investments. We knew Sarah would inherit something eventually. How much are we talking about? I asked, leaning against the wall for support. The final valuation came in yesterday. After taxes, it's just over $450 million. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. $450 million. My Sarah, my abandoned, exhausted daughter with 4 newborn babies and divorce papers on her lap, was now one of the richest women in the country. And her husband, who was at this very moment clearing out their apartment, had no idea what he had just thrown away. I stood there in that sterile hospital hallway, clutching my phone, the attorney's words echoing in my head. $450 million. The kind of money that changes everything and everyone around you. I thought about Thomas, walking away from his family just hours before, and a cold smile crept across my face. Mr. Miller, are you still there? The attorney's voice pulled me back. Yes, sorry. This is unexpected, I managed to say, my mind racing with possibilities. Sarah's husband just asked for a divorce. Today, right after she gave birth. The attorney let out a low whistle. Well, that's unfortunate timing on his part, isn't it? The inheritance is Sarah's alone. It was specified in her grandfather's will that it would go to her directly, not to be considered marital property. I leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. When should I tell her? She's been through so much already today. That's your call, Mr. Miller. But the news will break soon. These things always do. After hanging up, I walked slowly back to Sarah's room. She was awake now, staring at the ceiling, tear tracks dried on her pale cheeks. The envelope with divorce papers remained unopened beside her. I sat down gently on the edge of her bed and took her hand. Sweetheart, I have something to tell you, I said carefully. I just got a call from Grandpa Richard's attorney. She turned to me, barely interested. What was an inheritance compared to losing your husband and becoming a single mother to 4 babies in the same day? What did he want? Your grandfather's estate has finally been settled, I said, squeezing her hand. Sarah, he left you everything. She blinked slowly. Everything? You mean the lake house? I shook my head. I mean everything. All his properties, investments, companies. Everything. How much? She whispered, pushing herself up slightly in the bed. I looked into my daughter's eyes, still swollen from crying over a man who didn't deserve a single tear. $450 million, sweetheart. You're worth $450 million. For the first time since Thomas walked out, Sarah's eyes widened with something other than pain. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers. That's not possible. It is, and it's all yours. Not his. I nodded toward the divorce papers. Your grandfather's will specify it goes directly to you, not to be considered marital property. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her. Dad, I can't even process that amount. Is this really happening? Before I could answer, a nurse wheeled in 2 of the babies for feeding time. Here are your little angels, she said cheerfully, clearly trying to avoid mentioning the earlier scene with Thomas. The other 2 are still sleeping, but these hungry ones couldn't wait. Sarah's attention immediately shifted to her children. I watched in awe as she took them into her arms, her face transforming with a mother's love. In that moment, I saw what would save her. Not the money, but these 4 tiny humans who needed her. We're going to be okay, she whispered to them. Mommy's got you. 3 days later, Sarah and the babies, named Emma, Lily, Noah, and Ethan, were ready to come home. But not to the apartment she'd share with Thomas. I'd spent those days making arrangements, hiring a team to move Sarah's things to a luxury rental house I'd found. It had enough bedrooms for the babies, Sarah, me, and the 2 night nurses I'd insisted on hiring. As I pulled up to the apartment to collect the last of her personal items, I spotted Thomas's car in the parking lot. My blood ran cold. He wasn't supposed to be here. According to Sarah, he'd texted that he'd cleared out his stuff and wouldn't be back. I parked and walked slowly to the building, my old knees protesting the stairs to their 2nd floor unit. The door was ajar, and I could hear drawers being opened and closed. I pushed the door open to find Thomas frantically searching through Sarah's desk. He jumped when he saw me, then quickly composed himself. Just getting some financial documents I need, he said casually, as if he hadn't abandoned his wife and newborns 3 days ago. Anything specific you're looking for? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Just some investment stuff. Joint account information. I leaned against the doorframe, studying this man who had broken my daughter's heart. Funny timing. Finding your conscience right after Sarah inherited a fortune. His head snapped up. What? And there it was. The confirmation that he'd somehow heard about the money. His eyes gave him away, wide with panic that I knew his game. I decided to play dumb, to see how far he'd go. What are you talking about? I asked, faking confusion. Thomas hesitated, then forced a laugh. Nothing. Look, I've been thinking about everything, and I made a horrible mistake. The shock of 4 babies. I just panicked. I crossed my arms. You're telling me you want to come back? After what you did? People make mistakes, he said, his voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard from him before. I love Sarah. And those babies, they deserve their father. It took everything in me not to lunge across the room and grab him by his lying throat. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Let's call Sarah right now. Tell her you've had a change of heart. The panic in his eyes intensified. No, not yet. I need to do this right. Maybe take her flowers. See the babies first. The babies you said were impossible. The ones you walked away from before they were even a day old. My voice was ice. How did you find out, Thomas? Find out what? His attempt at innocence was pathetic. About the money. Sarah's inheritance. He froze. Then his shoulders slumped slightly. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, taking a step toward him. You walked out on my daughter at her most vulnerable moment. You abandoned 4 innocent babies without a second thought. And the very minute, you catch wind that Sarah's come into money, you're back, searching for financial documents, and spinning lies about making a mistake. Thomas straightened up, dropping the act. She's still my wife. Legally, I have rights. You have nothing, I said, pulling out my phone again. I recorded everything you just said. Every word. And I'm going to make sure the divorce judge hears it all. His face darkened. You think you're so clever. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair. Tell Sarah I'll be in touch. Very soon. As he brushed past me toward the door, he leaned in close. You know what rich women need most? Security. Protection. Someone to trust when everyone else is after their money. His smile was cold. Who better than the father of her children? After he left, I stood there shaking with rage. What Thomas didn't realize was that he'd just declared war on the wrong family. He thought Sarah was alone and vulnerable, but he'd forgotten about me. That evening, as Sarah sat in a rocking chair with baby Lily in her arms, I told her about my encounter with Thomas. I left nothing out, including his thinly veiled threats. She listened quietly, her face a mask of pain and resolve. I knew he'd come back when he found out, she said finally. His friend Jason works at the bank. He must have said something. How do you feel? I asked gently. She looked down at Lily's sleeping face. Stupid. Used. And. She hesitated, scared. I'm scared of what he might do. I took her free hand in mine. We'll protect you and the babies. I promise. How, Dad? He's right. Legally, he's still their father, my husband. The money doesn't change that. Her voice cracked. And I don't know the first thing about handling this kind of wealth. What if he contests everything? What if he tries to take the babies? I was about to reassure her when my phone rang. It was Elliot Green, the high-powered attorney I'd called earlier that day. Sarah, I need to take this. It's about protecting you and the kids. I stepped out onto the patio and answered. Elliot, thanks for calling back. Jim, I've been looking into your son-in-law situation, he said without preamble. You were right to be concerned. Thomas has already contacted 3 different divorce attorneys known for handling high-asset cases. And there's something else you should know. I gripped the phone tighter. What is it? He's been making calls to tabloid reporters. Apparently, he's shopping around his story. Abandoned husband, quadruplets, sudden inheritance. He's painting himself as the victim. My blood ran cold. Can he do that? Free country. Elliot sighed. But that's not the worst part. I had my investigator do a quick background check on him. Jim, your son-in-law has a history you need to know about. And it's going to change everything about how we handle this. The next morning, I sat at Sarah's kitchen table staring at the file Elliot had sent over. My hand shook slightly as I turned each damning page. The man my daughter had married, the father of my grandchildren, was not who any of us thought he was. Thomas Allen Walsh had been married before. Twice. Both times to wealthy women. Both ending in messy divorces where he walked away with substantial settlements. He had another child, a 7-year-old son he never saw or supported. There were restraining orders, allegations of emotional abuse, financial manipulation. This wasn't just a husband who panicked at becoming a father of 4. This was a calculated predator who had targeted my daughter from the beginning. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my dark thoughts. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck outside. Sarah was upstairs with the babies and the night nurse had just left, so I went to answer it. A young man stood there with a massive bouquet of roses. Delivery for Sarah Walsh, he said brightly. I took the flowers and thanked him. After closing the door, I found a card nestled among the blooms. Sarah, I made the biggest mistake of my life. Please forgive me. I want to meet our children properly and make things right. I love you. Always, Thomas. My jaw clenched so hard I could hear my teeth grinding. The audacity of this man was breathtaking. I placed the flowers on the counter and, tucked the card into my pocket. Sarah didn't need this additional stress right now. But before I could decide what to do next, another doorbell rang. This time, it was a courier with legal documents. I signed for them with a growing sense of dread. Back at the kitchen table, I opened the envelope to find emergency custody papers. Thomas was filing for joint physical custody of the Quadruplets, claiming Sarah was emotionally unstable and overwhelmed by her new financial situation. He was requesting the court appoint him as co-conservator of the children's financial interests to protect their inheritance. The doorbell rang a third time. When I opened it, I found not another delivery, but Thomas himself, dressed in an expensive suit I'd never seen before, holding 4 identical teddy bears. "Jim," he said with a nod, as if the scene at the apartment had never happened. "I've come to see Sarah and my children." I blocked the doorway, my body tense. "She doesn't want to see you." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's for her to say, isn't it? Not her elderly father who's suddenly playing bodyguard." "You've got some nerve," I said, keeping my voice low so Sarah wouldn't hear from upstairs. "Showing up here after what you did." He sighed dramatically. "People make mistakes, Jim. Surely at your age, you understand that." The shock of quadruplets. I panicked. "But I've had time to think, and I want to make things right." "Is that before or after you filed for emergency custody, claiming my daughter is unstable?" I held up the papers that had just been delivered. "Or before or after you contacted tabloid reporters to sell your story?" His expression flickered for just a moment before settling back into practiced sincerity. "I see my attorney has been overzealous in protecting my parental rights. As for reporters, they've been calling me constantly. I haven't spoken to any of them." "Leave now," I said firmly. "Any communication can go through our attorneys." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You're making a mistake, old man. I'm the father of those children. No judge will keep me away from them. And when Sarah realizes what's at stake, not just custody, but half of everything she has, she'll be much more reasonable than you." "Dad, who's at the door?" Sarah's voice came from the top of the stairs. She was holding one of the twins, Noah, I thought, by the blue blanket, and looked exhausted but determined. Thomas immediately pushed past me into the foyer. "Sarah," he called up, his voice warm and filled with fake emotion. "I've come to see you and our babies." Her face hardened as she slowly came down the stairs, cradling Noah protectively. "You mean the babies you said were impossible? The ones you walked out on at the hospital?" Thomas's face crumpled in a show of remorse. "I was wrong, so wrong. I was scared and overwhelmed. But I've had time to think, and I want to be part of our family." Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs and stood tall, looking stronger than I'd seen her since the birth. "You don't have a family here anymore, Thomas. You made that choice very clear." "Don't say that," he pleaded, holding out the teddy bears. "I'm their father. They need me. They need someone they can count on," she countered. "Someone who won't abandon them when things get hard." "People make mistakes," he insisted, taking another step toward her. "I deserve a second chance." I moved to stand beside Sarah, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You should leave now, Thomas. Sarah has made herself clear." His eyes flashed with anger before he quickly composed himself. "I have rights, Sarah. Legal rights as her father. Don't force me to exercise them in court. It will only hurt the children." Sarah's voice was steady when she replied. "Is that a threat?" "It's reality," he said. "We're still married. Those are my children. And half of everything you have is legally mine, including your new fortune." And there it was, the truth, finally spoken out loud. Sarah's grip on Noah tightened slightly as she stared at her husband. "So that's what this is about," she said softly. "The money." Thomas had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but recovered quickly. "The money changes things, yes. It means our children will have every opportunity. But they need both parents to guide them, to protect their interests. To protect their inheritance, you mean?" I interjected. He ignored me, focusing entirely on Sarah. "I know you're angry right now. You have every right to be. But think about our children. Think about their future. Don't let your pride cost them their father." For a terrible moment, I saw doubt flicker across Sarah's face. This man had been her husband for 5 years, the father of her children. And he was good, very good, at manipulation. But then Noah began to fuss, and Sarah instinctively soothed him, her focus shifting entirely to the baby in her arms. When she looked back up at Thomas, Her eyes were clear and resolute. "You can see yourself out," she said firmly. "And take these with you." She nodded toward the teddy bears. "My children deserve better than empty gestures." Thomas's face darkened. "You'll regret this approach, Sarah. I promise you that." He dropped the bears on the floor and turned to leave. At the door, he looked back at us. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." After he left, Sarah's composure crumbled. I guided her to the couch, taking Noah from her arms as she collapsed into tears. "He's going to take them," she sobbed. "He's going to use the money and turn everything against me." "No, he's not," I assured her, even as my own heart raced with worry. "We have evidence of who he really is. Elliot is building a case." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes red but suddenly alert. "What do you mean, who he really is?" I hesitated, not wanting to add to her burdens, but knowing she needed the full truth to protect herself. Elliot sent over a file on Thomas. "There's a lot you don't know." Over the next hour, as the baby slept upstairs under the watchful eye of the day nurse, I showed Sarah everything. The previous marriages, the restraining orders, the abandoned child. With each revelation, her face grew paler, but also harder, more resolved. "How did I not see this?" she whispered, staring at a police report filed by his second wife. "How did I miss all the signs?" "He's a professional at this, Sarah," I said gently. "He knows exactly what to say, how to act. You're not the first woman he's deceived." She stood up suddenly, pacing the living room. "But I will be the last," she said with quiet determination. "He's not getting my children, and he's not getting a penny of that money. Not after this." The next morning brought more unwelcome surprises. Thomas's claims had hit the tabloids overnight. Headlines screamed about the abandoned quadruplet dad and how the inheritance bride was keeping him from his children. There were quotes from friends about how devoted Thomas had been during the pregnancy, how excited he was to become a father. It was all lies, carefully crafted lies, but to anyone who didn't know better, Thomas looked like the victim. And it was working. Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters. People she thought were friends texted asking for her side of the story. Even the hospital called to warn that photographers were asking questions about the quadruplets' birth. Elliot arrived at the house at noon, bringing with him a woman he introduced as Megan Harper, a PR specialist who handled crisis management for high-profile clients. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," Megan warned us as we sat in the living room. "Thomas knows exactly what he's doing. He's building public sympathy, which can influence everything from custody arrangements to financial settlements." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, bouncing fussy baby Ethan on her knee while I held Emma. "We fight fire with fire," Megan said firmly. "We need to get ahead of this narrative. Show who Thomas really is." "No," Sarah said immediately. "I won't drag my children into a public mudslinging match. They deserve better than that." Elliot leaned forward. "Sarah, I understand your concerns. But Thomas isn't playing by gentlemen's rules here. He's trying to paint you as an unstable, greedy woman keeping a loving father from his children. We need to counter that." "With what? More tabloid stories? More public drama?" Sarah shook her head. "There has to be another way." Megan looked thoughtful. "What if we don't go public at all? What if we use his own playbook against him, but privately?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "Thomas wants money," Megan explained. "That's his endgame here. The custody threats, the public sympathy campaign, it's all leverage for a bigger settlement." Sarah nodded slowly. "So you're suggesting we offer him money to go away?" "No," Megan said with a slight smile. "I'm suggesting we make him think he's about to get money, and then pull the rug out from under him." For the first time in days, I saw a spark of hope in my daughter's eyes. "I'm listening." As Megan outlined her plan, I felt both admiration and concern. It was brilliant but risky. We would need Thomas to reveal his true intentions, to prove beyond doubt that his sudden return was solely about Sarah's inheritance. And to do that, we would need to set a trap that even a practiced con man couldn't resist. That evening, after the specialists left, Sarah and I sat on the patio, watching the sunset while the babies slept upstairs with the night nurse. She seemed lost in thought, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of her mother, strong, determined, but carrying a deep hurt. "I'm thinking about how quickly life can change. A week ago, I was just a normal pregnant woman with what I thought was a loving husband. Now I'm a single mother of quadruplets with millions of dollars and a con man, trying to take it all away. I reached over and took her hand. You're not alone in this. I'm here. We're going to protect you and those babies. I know, Dad. She squeezed my hand back. But I'm scared. Not just of Thomas, but of what all this money will do to our lives. What kind of target it puts on my children's backs. Before I could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it, and her face went white. It's from Thomas, she whispered. What does it say? I asked, fighting to keep my voice calm. She handed me the phone. The message read, I know what you're planning. Meet me tomorrow at noon at River Cafe, or I release everything I have on your father. Some very interesting Vietnam stories he never told you. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read Thomas's text again. Vietnam stories. What could he possibly know about my time there? Those memories were buried deep. Things I'd never shared with anyone. Not even Sarah's mother. Dad. Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. What is he talking about? What Vietnam stories? I handed the phone back to her, my hand trembling slightly. Nothing. He's bluffing, trying to throw us off balance. But even as I said the words, a cold dread settled in my stomach. There were things I'd done in Vietnam, things I'd had to do, that I'd spent 50 years trying to forget. Things that would change how Sarah saw me forever. Dad, you're scaring me, Sarah said, leaning forward to search my face. Is there something I should know? Something Thomas could use against us? I forced myself to meet her eyes. Every soldier has stories they don't tell, Sarah. Memories they keep locked away. But nothing illegal, right? Nothing that could hurt us now. I hesitated, just a fraction too long. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. There is something. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to think. I need to make a call, I said. Don't respond to Thomas yet. In the privacy of my bedroom, I called the one person who might understand. My old war buddy, Frank Delaney. Frank had been with me, in the jungle. He'd been there that night. Jimmy. His gruff voice answered on the third ring. This is a surprise. Everything okay? No, Frank, it's not, I said quietly. Someone is threatening to expose what happened at Song Tra. There was a long silence on the other end. That's impossible, Frank finally said. There were only 4 of us there that night, and 2 are dead. I sure as hell haven't talked, and I know you haven't either. Well, someone has, I insisted. My son-in-law is threatening to tell my daughter about it, if she doesn't meet his demands. Son-in-law, the one who walked out on her and the babies. Frank sounded incredulous. How the hell would he know about Song Tra? I don't know, I admitted. But he knows something, Frank. He mentioned Vietnam stories specifically. Maybe he's fishing, Frank suggested. Throwing out bait to see if you bite. I considered this possibility. Maybe. But I can't take that chance. Not with Sarah and the babies at stake. What are you going to do? I closed my eyes, seeing again the village, the night, the terrible choices we'd made. Whatever I have to protect my family. After hanging up, I returned to the patio where Sarah was waiting, her face tight with worry. Dad, whatever it is, you can tell me, she said. I'm not a child anymore. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her. There are things I did in war, things I'm not proud of, things that were necessary at the time, but look very different 50 years later. Sarah reached out and took my hand. We've all done things we regret. Not like this, I said quietly. There was a night in a village called Song Tra. I stopped, unable to continue. I can't put this burden on you, Sarah. Not now. Not with everything else you're dealing with. She squeezed my hand. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Just like we're facing Thomas. Before I could respond, Sarah's phone rang. The screen showed Elliot's name. She answered and put it on speaker. Sarah, Jim. Elliot's voice was tense. Thomas just filed an emergency motion with the court. He's claiming you're unfit to care for the quadruplets due to postpartum depression and alleged substance abuse. What? Sarah gasped. That's completely false. I know, Elliot assured her. But he's requesting a psychological evaluation and drug testing. He's also asking for temporary custody while this is investigated. My fists clenched. He can't do this. It's all lies. Unfortunately, he can make the accusation, Elliot said grimly. And given the high-profile nature of this case, wealthy heiress, quadruplets, tabloid interest, the judge might order the evaluation just to be thorough. So what do we do? Sarah asked, her voice small. We fight it, Elliot said firmly. But Sarah, you need to know, he's also filed financial disclosures claiming he was instrumental in building your grandfather's business. He's saying he advised you on investment strategies that directly increase the value of your inheritance. I couldn't contain my disbelief. That's absurd. He never even met Sarah's grandfather. I know, Elliot sighed. But he's produced emails showing financial discussions between him and Sarah, and he's claiming these strategies were implemented through her. Sarah's face had gone pale. Those were hypothetical discussions. We were playing a stock market game on his phone. He said it would help me understand investing better. He's twisting everything, I said, my anger building, making innocent conversations look sinister. There's more, Elliot continued reluctantly. He's filed a separate motion requesting that the court freeze all assets from the inheritance, pending investigation of his claims that he contributed to the growth of those assets. Sarah put her head in her hands. He's trying to trap me. If he freezes the inheritance, I won't have money to fight him in court. Not necessarily, Elliot countered. Your grandfather's estate has already established trusts for the quadruplets' education and health care. Those are separate from your personal inheritance and should be protected. And we can fight the asset freeze. It's an overreach. As Elliot continued outlining our legal options, I watched my daughter's face. The shock was giving way to something harder. Determination, yes, but also a deep anger that reminded me so much of myself. After the call ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes steely. I'm meeting him tomorrow. Sarah, no. I need to hear what he knows, Dad. About you, about the inheritance, about everything. And I need him to say it to my face. It's too dangerous, I insisted. He's manipulative. He'll twist your words. That's why I won't be alone, she said firmly. I want you there, and Elliot. And I want to record everything. He specifically said to come alone. I reminded her. Sarah's jaw set in a way that told me the discussion was over. I'm done playing by his rules. The next morning, while Sarah fed the babies with help from a nurse, I called Elliot to discuss our approach for the meeting with Thomas. We needed to be careful, strategic. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about protecting Sarah's reputation and her right to raise her children. We need to be prepared for anything, Elliot warned. Thomas has proven he'll go to any length to get what he wants. What about this Vietnam threat? I asked, lowering my voice so Sarah wouldn't overhear. Could he really know something? Elliot hesitated. Jim, I have to ask, is there anything from your military service that could be used against you? I closed my eyes briefly. Yes, but it was 50 years ago, during wartime. Different rules applied then. I understand, Elliot said carefully. But in today's world, with social media and cancel culture, old actions can be judged by new standards. If there's something serious, we need to be prepared. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a black SUV with tinted windows parked in the driveway. It wasn't noon yet. Thomas wasn't due for hours. I opened the door to find a tall, serious-looking man in a dark suit. Mr. Miller? I'm Agent Wilson with the FBI. I need to speak with you and your daughter regarding Thomas Walsh. My heart nearly stopped. The FBI? What's this about? He glanced around. May I come in? This is a sensitive matter. I stepped aside, my mind racing. Why would the FBI be involved? What had Thomas done? As the agent entered, Sarah came down the stairs, her face questioning. Dad, what's going on? Agent Wilson showed us both his credentials. Mrs. Walsh, Mr. Miller, I apologize for the unexpected visit, but we've been investigating Thomas Walsh for some time. We believe he may be involved in a pattern of fraud targeting wealthy women. Sarah sank into a chair, looking both stunned and vindicated. So, I wasn't the first. No, ma'am. Agent Wilson confirmed. We've documented at least 3 previous incidents with a similar pattern. Marriage, pregnancy or childbirth, abandonment, followed by legal and financial maneuvering. And you're just telling us this now. I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. My daughter has been through hell because of this man. Agent Wilson had the grace to look apologetic. We couldn't risk tipping him off. Until recently, we didn't have enough evidence to make a case. But his latest actions, the custody filing, the asset freeze request, the media manipulation, have given us what we need. Sarah leaned forward. What exactly are you investigating him for? Wire fraud, identity theft, extortion, and potential money laundering, the agent replied. We have reason to believe Mr. Walsh has been moving money through offshore accounts using identities stolen from his former wives and their family members. I felt a chill run down my spine. Identity theft? Whose identities? Agent Wilson pulled out a tablet and brought up a document. We've confirmed he opened accounts using the identities of his second wife's deceased father and brother. We're still investigating other instances. Sarah went pale. My grandfather. The inheritance. Could he have somehow? We don't believe he's accessed your inheritance funds yet, Agent Wilson assured her. But that appears to be his goal. The custody battle, the media campaign, it's all designed to pressure you into a settlement he can then funnel through his existing network. How did you find all this out? I asked. Agent Wilson's expression became more guarded. We received information from a confidential source. Someone close to Mr. Walsh who became concerned about his activities. A thought struck me. These Vietnam stories he's threatening to expose about me. Could that be related to identity theft too? The agent looked genuinely puzzled. Vietnam stories. I'm not aware of anything in our investigation related to your military service, Mr. Miller. Sarah and I exchanged glances. If the FBI didn't know about Vietnam, then how did Thomas? Unless. He's bluffing, Sarah said, realization dawning. He doesn't know anything about Dad's time in Vietnam. He's just trying to scare us. Agent Wilson made some notes on his tablet. It's a common tactic. Make vague threats about having damaging information and see how the target reacts. If you show fear or offer to pay for silence, they know they've hit on something valuable. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by anger. Thomas had been playing on my deepest fears, manipulating me just as he'd manipulated Sarah. So what happens now? Sarah asked. We're supposed to meet him at noon today. Agent Wilson straightened up. That's actually why I'm here. We'd like your help in gathering evidence against Mr. Walsh. If you're willing, we would like to wire you for the meeting. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Whatever it takes to stop him from doing this to anyone else. I put my hand on her shoulder. Are you sure about this? It could be dangerous. I'm sure, Dad, she said firmly. Thomas has taken enough from me. He doesn't get to take my power too. As Agent Wilson outlined the plan, I felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. My daughter was showing incredible strength, but Thomas was unpredictable. If he felt cornered, there was no telling what he might do. There's one more thing you should know, Agent Wilson said as he was preparing to leave. We have reason to believe Mr. Walsh has accessed your medical records from the hospital, Mrs. Walsh. The accusations about postpartum depression and substance abuse, those appear to be based on deliberately misinterpreted notes from your prenatal care. Sarah gasped. But that's private information. How could he access that? We're still investigating, but it appears he may have an accomplice at the hospital. The agent's face was grim. Someone who provided him with information they shouldn't have. After Agent Wilson left to prepare the surveillance equipment, Sarah and I sat in stunned silence. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. Do you think he has someone watching the house too? Could he know the FBI was here? I hadn't considered that possibility, but now it seemed frighteningly likely. We should assume he's monitoring everything. Your phone, the house, maybe even the nurses. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. The babies are safe upstairs, I assured her quickly. But from now on, we trust no one we haven't personally vetted. And we say nothing about the FBI involvement, even to Elliot, until after the meeting. She nodded, then suddenly froze. Dad, what if the nurse upstairs is working for him? What if? Before she could finish, a crash came from upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Then, horrifyingly, a baby's cry cut through the air. Sarah and I bolted upstairs, taking the steps two at a time. My old knees screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The sound of crying grew louder as we reached the nursery door. Inside, we found the day nurse, Angela, standing protectively over the baby's cribs. The window was shattered, glass scattered across the floor, and a large rock sat among the shards. Someone threw it from outside, Angela said, her voice shaking. I was changing Ethan when it came through. Thank God the babies weren't near the window. Sarah rushed to check each crib while I moved toward the broken window, careful to avoid the glass. Looking down, I could see a hooded figure running toward a car parked on the street. Call 911, I told Angela, pulling out my own phone to take pictures of the car as it sped away. I caught a partial license plate before it disappeared around the corner. Sarah was holding Noah now, her face pale but composed as she soothed the crying infant. "Everyone's okay," she reported. "Just scared." Within minutes, the house was swarming with police officers. One of them found a note attached to the rock. He handed it to me with a gloved hand. The message was typed in bold letters. "Back off, or next time IT won't be a rock." I showed it to Sarah, whose face hardened with anger rather than fear. "He's trying to scare me into giving him what he wants," she said quietly. "But all he's doing is proving exactly why he should never be near these babies." While the police took statements and collected evidence, Agent Wilson returned. His face was grim as he examined the broken window. "This changes things," he said. "We need to move you and the children to a secure location before your meeting with Thomas." "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising both of us. "If we leave now, he wins. He'll know his intimidation tactics are working." "Sarah, be reasonable," I pleaded. "He's escalating. This isn't just about money anymore." She looked at me, her jaw set stubbornly in a way that reminded me painfully of her mother. "That's exactly why we can't run, Dad. This isn't just about money. It's about control. If I start running now, I'll never stop." Agent Wilson seemed torn. "Mrs. Walsh, I understand your position, but my priority is your safety and the safety of your children." Sarah bounced little Emma gently in her arms. "And my priority is making sure these 4 babies grow up, never having to look over their shoulders for their father. The only way to do that is to face him head on, today, with your help." After much discussion, we reached a compromise. The babies would be moved to a secure location with Angela and 2 FBI agents posing as additional nurses. Sarah and I would stay at the house, with surveillance teams positioned outside. The meeting with Thomas would proceed as planned. As the agents prepared Sarah for the wire she would wear, I stepped outside to call Elliot and update him on the situation. I left out the FBI involvement, as agreed, but told him about the rock and the threat. "This is serious, Jim," Elliot said, his voice tense. "We should postpone the meeting, get a restraining order." "Sarah won't hear of it," I said, watching through the window as an agent showed my daughter how to activate the recording device. "And honestly, Elliot, I think she's right. Thomas won't stop unless we stop him." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Elliot asked. I thought about the Vietnam threat, the rock through the window, the fear in my grandchildren's cries. "By letting him think he's winning," I said slowly, "and then taking everything away from him, just like he tried to do to Sarah." At 11:45, Sarah and I arrived at the River Cafe. She looked remarkably calm in a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Only the shadows under her eyes revealed the strain she was under. "Remember," I said as we walked toward the entrance, "the goal is to get him to admit his intentions. Don't engage with his accusations or threats. Just keep him talking about the money." Sarah nodded. "I know, Dad. I can do this." We'd chosen a table in the back corner, where Sarah would have a clear view of the entire restaurant while I sat at the bar, pretending to be a stranger, but close enough to intervene if necessary. Agent Wilson and his team were positioned throughout the cafe and outside in unmarked vehicles. Thomas arrived exactly at noon, dressed in an expensive suit that I suspected was new. He frowned when he saw me at the bar, but focused his attention on Sarah. "I told you to come alone," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Sarah shrugged, and I decided not to. My father's keeping his distance, but he stays in my sight. That's non-negotiable. Thomas glanced my way, his expression calculating. "Fine. It doesn't matter anyway." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What matters is that you understand exactly what's at stake here." I couldn't hear the rest of their conversation from my position, but I could see Sarah's face. She remained composed, nodding occasionally, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. After about 10 minutes, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook, writing something down. Thomas smiled triumphantly. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. "At courthouse. Judge Henley granted temporary stay on asset freeze. Thomas doesn't know yet." I allowed myself a small smile. 1 point for our side. Sarah and Thomas talked for nearly 45 minutes. I watched as his expressions shifted from confident to persuasive to increasingly agitated. Finally, he stood up abruptly, leaning down to say something directly into Sarah's face before storming out of the restaurant. I hurried over to her. Are you okay? What happened? Sarah's hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. I got it all. Every threat, every demand. She touched the small microphone hidden in her blouse, and I made him think I'm considering his offer, which was $200 million, she said, her voice hollow, in exchange for full custody of the babies and his silence about you. 200 million. I repeated, stunned by his audacity. And what did you say? I told him I needed 48 hours to transfer the funds. He wanted it done immediately, but I explained that moving that much money takes time. A small, grim smile touched her lips. He bought it. He's going to text me wire instructions later today. Agent Wilson joined us at the table. You did incredibly well, Mrs. Walsh. We got everything we need. His explicit demands for money in exchange for custody rights alone is enough for extortion charges. And the threats about my father? Sarah asked. Wilson's expression was guarded. Those are concerning. He claimed to have documentation about a classified operation in Vietnam that resulted in civilian casualties. He said exposure would lead to war crime charges. My blood ran cold. Thomas couldn't possibly know about Song Tra, unless someone who was there had talked. But Frank had sworn he hadn't said anything, and the other two men were dead. It's a bluff, I said, with more confidence than I felt. He's fishing for a reaction. Agent Wilson studied me carefully. For your sake, Mr. Miller, I hope you're right. But regardless, making threats to expose alleged criminal activity for financial gain is extortion, whether the allegations are true or not. As we left the restaurant, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Thomas. Wire instructions attached. You have 48 hours. After that, the world learns about Daddy's war crimes and you never see your babies again. Sarah showed me the message, her face grim. He really believes I'm going to give him the money. That's good, I said, putting an arm around her shoulders. Let him think he's won. It'll make what happens next even more satisfying. Back at the house, with agents posted outside and sweeping for surveillance devices inside, Sarah finally broke down. She sank onto the couch, her body shaking with exhausted sobs. I can't do this anymore, Dad, she whispered as I sat beside her. I'm so tired. The babies, the money, Thomas, these threats, it's too much. I held her close, feeling the weight of her despair. I know, sweetheart, but you're stronger than you think. You stood up to him today. You protected your children. But what if he's right? What if I can't handle all this? For babies, millions of dollars, reporters following our every move. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Maybe the babies will be better off with someone else. Maybe. Stop right there, I said firmly. That's not you talking. That's exhaustion and fear. Those babies need their mother. Not Thomas, not some nanny, not even me. They need you. She wiped her eyes. But the money is just money. I finished for her. It doesn't define you. It doesn't change who you are. Sarah took a shuddering breath. Thomas knew exactly which buttons to push. He said I was turning into mom, taking on too much, headed for a breakdown. The mention of Sarah's mother sent a pang through my heart. Jean had struggled with depression for years, especially after Sarah was born. But she had been a wonderful mother, loving and present, fighting her demons every day to be there for her daughter. You are like your mother, I said softly. You have her strength, her determination, her capacity for love. And yes, maybe some of her vulnerability too. That's not a weakness, Sarah. It's what makes you human. As we sat there, the house phone rang. Agent Wilson, who had been conferring with his team in the kitchen, answered it. A moment later, he came into the living room, his face grave. Mrs. Walsh, there's a situation at the safe house. One of the agents stationed there has reported a suspicious vehicle circling the block. As a precaution, they're moving the babies to a secondary location. Sarah was on her feet immediately. I need to be with them. That's not advisable right now, Wilson said. If Thomas is having you watched, leading you to the babies would compromise their safety. They need me, Sarah insisted. They're too young to be without their mother. I took her hand. The agent's right, Sarah. Just for tonight, let them stay protected while we deal with Thomas. She looked torn, her maternal instinct warring with logic. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. Can I at least talk to Angela? Make sure they have everything they need. Wilson made the arrangements, and minutes later Sarah was on the phone with the nurse, getting updates on each baby. The conversation seemed to calm her, bringing her back from the edge of despair to a renewed sense of purpose. After she hung up, Sarah turned to me and Agent Wilson, her expression resolute. "So what's our next move?" I refused to sit here and wait for Thomas to attack again. Wilson looked impressed by her recovery. "We have enough to arrest him now, but I'd prefer to catch him in the act of accepting the wire transfer. That would give us a stronger case." "So, I actually sent him money?" Sarah asked, frowning. "Not exactly," Wilson explained. "We can set up a transfer that appears to be processing, but never completes. When he attempts to access the funds, we'll have him for wire fraud as well as extortion." I watched my daughter considering this plan, her analytical mind, the one that had made her so successful in her career before the pregnancy, visibly working through the implications. "And what about his threats regarding my father?" she asked. "How do we handle those?" Wilson glanced at me. "Unless your father confirms there's any truth to these allegations, we treat them as part of the extortion attempt." All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of 50 years of silence pressing down. I had never told anyone about Songtra, not my wife, not my daughter, not even my therapist during the dark years after I returned home. Only the men who were there knew the truth, and 2 of them were dead. But as I looked at Sarah's exhausted, determined face, I knew the time for secrets was over. Thomas had made my past a weapon. The only way to disarm him was to take away its power. "There is something," I said quietly, "something that happened in 1971 in a village called Songtra." The room went silent as I began to speak. Words I'd held inside for half a century finally found their way out, heavy with the weight of memories I'd tried so hard to forget. It was monsoon season. My unit was sent to investigate reports that the Viet Cong were using a village called Songtra as a supply point. We were told to expect resistance, armed guerrillas hiding among the civilians. I paused, the humid jungle air seeming to fill my lungs again after all these years. We approached at night. The rain was coming down in sheets, visibility near zero. Our point man thought he saw movement at the edge of the village, a figure running between huts. He fired. Then everyone was firing. Sarah sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving my face. Agent Wilson had stopped taking notes, just listening. When it was over, when the shooting stopped, we moved into the village. My voice had become a monotone, the only way I could get through this. There were no guerrillas, no weapons. Just villagers who had been running for shelter from American soldiers approaching in the rain. "How many?" Sarah asked quietly. 11 dead. 4 of them children. The words hung in the air between us. Our commanding officer radioed back that we'd engaged enemy combatants. Filed a report saying we'd found weapons that were washed away in the flooding before they could be recovered. It was a lie, but we all signed it. Agent Wilson's face remained professionally neutral. Was there an investigation? Not really. It was 1971. The war was going badly. No one wanted another My Lai on their hands, so they buried it, classified the mission, transferred us to different units, and pretended it never happened. "And that's what Thomas is threatening to expose," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. I nodded. If he somehow got access to those classified reports, found witnesses, I couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too devastating. "Could you face prosecution now?" Sarah asked, her voice small. Agent Wilson answered before I could. "Unlikely. The statute of limitations for most federal crimes is 5 years. Even war crimes would be virtually impossible to prosecute after 50 years, especially with limited evidence. But the court of public opinion." He left the rest unsaid. The implication was clear. Even if I couldn't be legally prosecuted, the exposure would destroy my reputation, hurt Sarah and the babies. We'd be hounded by media, subjected to public hatred. The quadruplets would grow up, known as the grandchildren of a war criminal. So Thomas is threatening something that probably can't happen legally, but would ruin us socially and emotionally, Sarah concluded. That tracks with everything else he's done. Maximum pain for maximum gain. I reached for her hand. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never thought those ghosts would come back to haunt you and the babies." She squeezed my fingers, her eyes shining with tears but also with something else, determination. "Dad, you were 22 years old. in a war zone, following orders. What happened was tragic, but it doesn't erase the 50 years of good you've done since then, the father you've been to me, the grandfather you'll be to my children. Her forgiveness hit me like a physical force, nearly buckling my knees. For 50 years, I'd carried this burden alone, certain that if the truth ever came out, I would lose everyone I loved. The question now, Agent Wilson said, bringing us back to the immediate problem, is how did Thomas get this information? These would be highly classified documents, not something he could Google. Could he be bluffing? Sarah suggested, making educated guesses based on Dad's reaction. I shook my head. He mentioned Song Tra by name. That's not a guess. So someone told him, Wilson concluded. Someone who was there, or someone with access to the classified files. A terrible thought struck me. Frank, my old war buddy, the one person besides me who knew the truth and was still alive. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. Yet even as I protested, doubt crept in. Frank had fallen on hard times recently. His son had mentioned medical bills, financial struggles. Wilson was already typing on his phone. Frank Delaney? We'll look into any connection between him and Thomas Walsh. Sarah stood up suddenly. None of this matters right now. The past is the past. What matters is protecting my babies from Thomas in the present. She turned to Agent Wilson. I won't go ahead with the wire transfer trap. Tonight. I'm done waiting for him to make the next move. Wilson nodded. I'll get it set up. We'll need access to your accounts. While Sarah worked with the agents to create the appearance of a massive wire transfer, I stepped outside onto the patio to clear my head. The evening air was cool, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. After 50 years of running from my past, it had finally caught up with me. Yet somehow, I felt lighter having shared the burden, even under these circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Jimmy, it's Frank. We need to talk. Not on the phone. Meet me at Riverside Park, the boat landing. 9 p.m. Come alone. It's about Thomas. My heart raced. How had Frank known about Thomas? I hadn't mentioned him by name when we spoke earlier. Unless. I showed the text to Agent Wilson, who immediately advised against meeting Frank alone. This could be a trap, Mr. Miller. Let's handle it. But I knew Frank, or thought I did. If he was involved with Thomas somehow, I needed to know why, needed to hear it from his own lips. I'm going, I said firmly. But you can have your people nearby. At 8:45, I arrived at the deserted boat landing. FBI agents were positioned discreetly around the perimeter, and I wore a wire similar to the one Sarah had used earlier. The night was quiet, just the sound of water lapping against the dock and distant traffic. At precisely 9 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows. Frank looked older than when I'd last seen him, more stooped, his face deeply lined. Jimmy, he said, his voice raspy. Thanks for coming. What's going on, Frank? How do you know Thomas? He sighed heavily, lowering himself onto a bench. I don't. Not really. A couple months ago, a man approached me at the VFW. Said he was writing a book about Vietnam, wanted first-hand accounts, paid cash for interviews. And you told him about Song Tra? I couldn't keep the betrayal from my voice. Frank looked ashamed. Not at first. But Margie's cancer treatments. The bills were piling up. He kept offering more money for the real stories, the ones that never made it into the official records. So you sold me out. The words tasted bitter. I didn't use your name, Frank insisted. I swear, Jimmy. I never said who was there with me. But he must have done his research, figured it out from unit assignments. This man, I pressed. What did he look like? Tall, dark hair, expensive clothes. Called himself Alan. Said he was a history professor. Thomas's middle name was Alan. It had to be him, using a fake story to get information he could use against me. Why are you telling me this now? Frank's eyes were haunted. He came back yesterday. Showed me pictures he'd taken. Of you, of Sarah, of those babies. Said he knew I'd lied about not remembering names. Said if I didn't give him the official report I'd kept, he'd make sure Margie's insurance got canceled. My blood ran cold. What official report? The original. Before they made us change it. I kept a copy insurance, I called it. In case they ever try to hang it all on us grunts. Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. I'm giving it to you, Jimmy. Do whatever you need to with it. I'm done being scared of the past. As I took the envelope, a twig snapped in the darkness behind us. Frank and I both turned to see a figure emerging from the trees. Thomas, holding something in his hand that gleamed dully in the moonlight. "How touching," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Two old war criminals, reuniting over their shared atrocities. This is between us, Thomas," I said, rising to face him. "Sarah isn't part of it." He laughed, a cold sound that echoed across the water. "Sarah is the whole point. Or rather, her money is." He gestured with what I now could see was a gun. "That envelope, please. The last piece I need." "It won't help you," I said, trying to stall while hoping the FBI agents were moving into position. Even with this, no court would prosecute after 50 years. "Courts?" Thomas looked genuinely amused. "I don't care about courts. I care about leverage. When Sarah sees what her beloved father did, what her children's grandfather is capable of, she'll pay anything to keep it quiet." His smile was predatory. "And that first payment is coming tonight, isn't it? $200 million. Just the beginning." "You're wrong about Sarah," I said firmly. "She already knows everything. I told her about Song Tra this afternoon." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Thomas's face. "You're lying. And she's not transferring any money," I continued, pressing my advantage. "The FBI has been tracking your extortion attempts, your identity theft, your offshore accounts. It's over, Thomas." His expression hardened. "If I'm going down, I'm not going alone. Give me that envelope." "Drop the gun, Mr. Walsh." Agent Wilson's voice cut through the darkness as he and 3 other agents emerged from cover, weapons drawn. "You're under arrest for extortion, wire fraud, identity theft, and now, threatening a federal witness with a deadly weapon." For a moment, Thomas looked like he might try to run, or worse, use the gun. But then his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the agents moved in to handcuff him, he looked at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Not by a long shot." I watched as they led him away, feeling not triumph, but exhaustion. It had been a day of revelations and confrontations, of old wounds reopened and new ones inflicted. But at least my grandchildren were safe now. Thomas was in custody, and the threat he posed was contained. Or so I thought. As Agent Wilson was debriefing me, his phone rang. The call was brief, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "What is it?" I asked as he hung up. "There's been a breach at the safe house," he said grimly. "Not the primary location. We moved the babies from there hours ago. But somehow someone got the address of the backup location. Our agents confronted an intruder trying to enter through a window." My heart nearly stopped. "The babies. They're fine," Wilson assured me quickly. "The intruder never got near them." But here's the concerning part. It wasn't Thomas. He was with us at the time. Then who? A woman. Early 30s, claimed to be a friend of Thomas's. She had detailed information about the quadruplets, birthmarks, medications, feeding schedules. I felt sick. Thomas has an accomplice. More than an accomplice, it seems, Wilson said. She's refusing to speak without a lawyer, but she had this in her possession. He showed me a photo on his phone, a marriage certificate with Thomas's name and a woman named Rebecca Allen, dated 3 years ago. He's already married? The pieces started falling into place. Thomas's periodic business trips, his reluctance to have Sarah meet certain friends, his insistence on separate bank accounts. It appears so, which means his marriage to your daughter may be bigamous and therefore invalid. I sat down heavily on the bench Frank had vacated. Does Sarah know? Wilson shook his head. We're bringing her in now for questioning, but I wanted to prepare you first. This case just got a lot more complicated. As we drove back to the house, my mind raced with implications. If Thomas's marriage to Sarah was invalid, how did that affect the babies legally? Would this woman, this Rebecca, try to claim some connection to them? And what did she want badly enough to risk breaking into a house guarded by federal agents? Sarah was waiting in the living room when we arrived, pacing nervously. Dad, is it true? They caught Thomas. I nodded, taking her hands in mine. Yes, but there's more you need to know. As gently as I could, I explained about the woman at the safe house, the marriage certificate, what it might mean. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through shock, anger, and finally, an eerie calm. So my entire marriage was a lie, she said flatly when I finished. Not just the love part, but the legal part too. It appears that way, Agent Wilson confirmed. We're still investigating, but the certificate looks authentic. Sarah laughed suddenly, a sharp sound with no humor in it. You know what the strangest part is? I feel relieved. Like a weight has been lifted. If our marriage wasn't real, then none of this. The abandonment, the betrayal, the custody threats. None of it was real either. I wasn't sure she was processing this in a healthy way, but before I could say anything, Wilson's phone rang again. This time, his face paled as he listened. When? How? He demanded. Then, lock down every exit. Alert Border Patrol and airport security. He hung up, his expression grim. Thomas has escaped custody. During transport to the federal detention center, the van was ambushed. 2 agents injured. Thomas and 2 armed accomplices fled the scene. Sarah's momentary calm evaporated. The babies are being moved again as we speak, Wilson assured her. To a location not even I know. The transport is being handled by our most experienced agents. I need to be with them, Sarah insisted. Wilson shook his head. Mrs. Walsh, you are Thomas's primary target. The safest place for your children right now is away from you. The truth of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sank onto the couch, her face crumpling. When does this end? When can I just be a mother to my babies? I sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. Soon, sweetheart. We'll get through this. But even as I said the words, I wondered if they were true. Thomas had proven himself more dangerous, more connected, more determined than any of us had anticipated. He had a second wife, armed accomplices, the resources to orchestrate a jailbreak. What else was he capable of? As if reading my thoughts, Agent Wilson's expression turned grave. There's something else you both should know. In the van, just before the ambush, Thomas made a statement to the transporting agents. He said, and I quote, "Tell Sarah I'm not interested in a deal anymore. Now it's about payback." The words hung in the air, ominous and threatening. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tightly as we faced the terrifying reality. This was no longer about money. It was personal, and Thomas Walsh had nothing left to lose. Dawn broke on day 5 of our nightmare. Pale light filtering through the blinds of the safe house where Agent Wilson had moved Sarah and me after Thomas's escape. The location was known to only 3 people in the FBI, with rotating security details who knew us only as the protectees. The Quadruplets were elsewhere, still separated from their mother for their own safety. Sarah sat by the window, staring at a tablet showing a live video feed of the babies in their secure nursery. She could see them, talk to them through the nurses, but couldn't hold them, couldn't feed them, couldn't be the mother she so desperately wanted to be. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and she'd barely eaten in days. You should try to sleep, I said gently, placing a cup of coffee beside her. She didn't look up from the tablet. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I see him taking my babies. I sat down across from her. The FBI has every available agent looking for him. Border Patrol, airport security, highway checkpoints. He can't hide forever. Can't he? She finally met my gaze. He hid a whole second marriage for me, for years. He had offshore accounts, false identities, armed accomplices, all without me suspecting a thing. What if he's better at this than they are? Before I could respond, Agent Wilson entered the room, his face showing the strain of 3 days with minimal sleep. We have a lead, he announced. Thomas's second wife, Rebecca, is talking. She wants a deal. Sarah straightened. What is she saying? That she was as deceived as you were, Wilson replied. She claims Thomas told her you knew about their marriage, that you were his ex-wife who had agreed to help him have children through IVF, because Rebecca couldn't conceive. That's insane, Sarah said. I never met the woman. She says the same about you, Wilson noted. According to Rebecca, Thomas kept you both separated, claiming each of you wanted privacy. She believed the quadruplets were legally hers as well as his, and that you had agreed to be the surrogate. I shook my head in disbelief. And she believed this ridiculous story? People believe what they want to believe, Wilson said simply, especially when the alternative is admitting they've been played for a fool. So she broke into the safe house to what? Kidnap her surrogate's babies? Sarah's voice was bitter. In her mind, they were her babies too. Thomas had convinced her that once you delivered, you were planning to turn them over to them as agreed. But then you changed your mind and stole the babies after their birth. Sarah pressed her fingers to her temples. This is madness. How could anyone believe such an elaborate lie? Thomas is very convincing, I reminded her gently. He fooled you, me, our entire family. More importantly, Wilson continued, Rebecca has given us information about Thomas's plans. She says he has a private plane waiting at a small airfield outside the city. He intends to leave the country tonight with the Quadruplets. Sarah went pale. How would he even find them? Wilson's expression was grim. He has someone on the inside. Someone in the FBI. The revelation hit like a physical blow. No wonder Thomas had stayed one step ahead of us. No wonder he'd known about safe houses and transport routes. Do you know who? I asked. We have suspicions, but nothing concrete yet. We're compartmentalizing information, changing protocols. In the meantime, we need to move you both again. Sarah stood up, suddenly resolute. No. Wilson blinked. Excuse me. No more running. No more hiding. Her voice was steady, her eyes clear for the first time in days. We've been reacting to Thomas, letting him control the situation. It's time we took back control. Mrs. Walsh, with all due respect, he wants my babies. He wants to hurt me by taking them. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. So let him try. But on my terms, not his. I recognized the look on her face. The same determined expression Jean would get when she'd made up her mind about something important. There would be no changing Sarah's course now. What are you suggesting? Wilson asked cautiously. A trap, Sarah said simply. We let him think he's found us. Let him think he has a clear shot at getting the babies. But we'll be ready. Absolutely not. I objected. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than wondering for the rest of our lives when he'll try again. Sarah countered. More dangerous than living in hiding, separated from my children? No, Dad. This ends now, one way or another. Over the next few hours, against my objections and Agent Wilson's initial reluctance, Sarah laid out her plan. It was daring, risky, but also the kind of unpredictable move that might catch Thomas off guard. Wilson brought in his most trusted agents to refine the strategy, close every loophole, prepare for every contingency. By midnight, everything was in place. The Quadruplets, actually 4 lifelike dolls wrapped in the baby's actual blankets, were ostensibly being transported from one safe house to another. The convoy included 2 identical black SUVs, each staffed with agents. According to the official route filed with the FBI, they would take the highway past the small airfield where Thomas's plane was waiting. The real babies remained safely hidden at a location known only to Sarah, Wilson, and me. 2 of Wilson's most trusted agents, women he'd worked with for 15 years, were with them. Sarah and I waited in a tactical van half a mile from the airfield, watching through surveillance cameras as the convoy approached the critical stretch of isolated road where Thomas would most likely make his move. Agent Wilson sat beside us, coordinating with his team through a secure radio. Transport reaching Checkpoint Alpha, a voice reported. No signs of pursuit or surveillance. I watched Sarah's face in the blue glow of the monitors. She sat perfectly still, her expression focused, showing none of the fear I knew she must be feeling. In that moment, she reminded me not of Jean, but of myself, the young soldier I'd been before Vietnam, before Song Tra, before guilt and secrets had changed me forever. Movement on the access road. Another agent reported. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. Wilson leaned forward. That's them. All units, stand by. Remember, we need Thomas alive and talking. The next few minutes unfolded like a scene from a movie. Thomas's team executed a textbook ambush, forcing the convoy off the road with a spike strip, then blocking them with SUVs front and back. Men in tactical gear emerged, weapons drawn. Federal agents. Stand down, shouted the leader of our security detail, following the script we prepared. Gunfire erupted, but it was all carefully choreographed. Our agents firing at the ground, Thomas's men firing over the vehicles. No one was to be injured in this charade. Then I saw him, Thomas, hanging back behind his men, directing the operation. He looked different, harder, colder, his expensive suit replaced by tactical clothing, his corporate haircut grown out. Just 5 days on the run had transformed him. There he is, Sarah whispered, pointing to the monitor. I almost don't recognize him. That's the real Thomas, I said grimly. The one he kept hidden from you. We watched as his men forced our agents to the ground, zip-tied their hands. Then Thomas approached the second SUV, where the babies, were supposedly secured. He flung open the door, reached inside, and emerged holding 2 bundles. He took the bait, Wilson said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. He lifted his radio. All units hold position. Let him think he's won. Thomas passed the bundles to one of his men, then reached back for the other 2. Even from the surveillance feed, we could see the triumph on his face as he carried what he thought were 2 of my grandchildren toward one of his vehicles. Now, Sarah asked, her voice tight with tension. Wilson nodded. Now, he gave a command, and suddenly the night erupted with light and sound. Hidden tactical teams rose from concealed positions around the ambush site. Helicopter spotlights illuminated the area like daylight. Amplified voices ordered Thomas and his men to drop their weapons and surrender. For a moment, it seemed like our plan had worked perfectly. Several of Thomas's men immediately dropped to their knees, hands raised. But Thomas himself reacted differently. He froze, still clutching the bundled babies, a look of utter disbelief on his face. Then, as agents approached him from all sides, something shifted in his expression. I recognized it immediately, the look of a man with nothing left to lose. He's going to run, I said urgently. Before the words were fully out of my mouth, Thomas bolted toward the trees, still carrying the bundles. 2 of his men provided covering fire, forcing our agents to take cover. All units do not, repeat, do not, return fire, Wilson commanded. Suspect has what he believes are infants. Let me talk to him, Sarah said suddenly, reaching for Wilson's radio. He'll listen to me. Wilson hesitated, then handed her the radio. Channel 3. Sarah took a deep breath, then pressed the talk button. Thomas, it's Sarah. I know you can hear me. There was a long pause. Then Thomas's voice came through, breathless but still arrogant. A bit late for negotiations, don't you think, Sarah? No negotiations, she replied, her voice steady. I just thought you should know those aren't my babies you're carrying. Another pause. You're lying. Look at them, Thomas. Really look. Sarah's voice took on an edge I'd never heard before. You never could tell them apart, could you? Never bothered to learn which twin was which. Those are dolls you're risking your life for. Through the surveillance feed, we saw Thomas stop at the edge of the tree line. He looked down at the bundles in his arms, then shifted one to peek inside the blanket. Where are they? He demanded, rage filling his voice. What have you done with my children? They were never your children, Sarah replied coldly. You made that very clear the day they were born. They're mine, Thomas. Only mine, and you will never see them again. This isn't over, he shouted, dropping the bundles now, unconcerned as they hit the ground. I'll find them. I'll find you. I'll. His words cut off as he turned to flee into the forest, only to find himself face to face with a wall of tactical agents who had circled behind him during Sarah's distraction. This time, there was nowhere to run. We watched in silence as Thomas was forced to the ground, handcuffed, and led to a transport vehicle. His men surrendered one by one, the fight gone out of them once their leader was captured. It's over, Wilson said, closing his laptop. We've got him, and this time he's not getting away. The charges will keep him in federal prison for decades. Sarah said nothing, just stared at the now dark screens, her expression unreadable. Sarah, I touched her arm gently. Are you okay? She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. I want my babies, Dad. I want to go get my babies. An hour later, we were reunited with the quadruplets at the secure location where they'd been hidden. Sarah gathered them all in her arms somehow, crying and laughing at the same time as she checked each perfect little face, each tiny hand and foot. They've missed you, said Claire, one of the agents who'd been caring for them. The little boy, Noah, he's been especially fussy. I think he knows his mama's voice. Sarah kissed Noah's downy head, then Emma's, then Lily's, then Ethan's. I'm never leaving you again, she whispered to them. Never. As I watched my daughter with her children, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Thomas was caught. The babies were safe. The nightmare was finally ending. But as Agent Wilson pulled me aside, his expression told me we weren't quite finished yet. There's one more thing you should know, he said quietly. When we searched Thomas after his arrest, we found this. He handed me a small flash drive. It contains proof of who gave him the information about Song Tra. I turned the drive over in my hand, suddenly uncertain if I wanted to know. Frank already confessed. Frank told part of the truth. Wilson corrected. But he wasn't the original source. Thomas had already learned about Song Tra before he approached Frank for confirmation. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Al, from your old commanding officer, Colonel James Blackwood. The name hit me like a physical blow. Blackwood, he's been dead for years. But his papers weren't, Wilson explained. His son found journals, official documents, letters, a whole archive detailing operations in Vietnam, including Song Tra. He was shopping them to publishers, historians, documentary filmmakers. And Thomas found him. I concluded, the pieces falling into place. Wilson nodded. Thomas was apparently researching Sarah's family background before they even married. Standard practice for con men, targeting wealthy families. He may have been planning this for years. Does Sarah need to know this? I asked, glancing at my daughter, who was finally smiling again as she cradled her babies. That's for you to decide, Wilson said. But the information is contained, Mr. Miller. Colonel Blackwood's son has been cooperating with us. The documents have been secured. Your past can remain in the past, if that's what you want. I looked at the flash drive in my palm, then at Sarah and my grandchildren. The future my past had somehow created, despite all its darkness. No more secrets, I said finally. Sarah deserves the whole truth. But not today. Today is for healing. Wilson nodded in understanding, then left us alone, a family finally reunited, finally safe. Later that night, as Sarah slept in an adjoining room with all 4 babies somehow nestled around her, I sat by the window watching the stars. The same stars that had shone down on a young soldier in Vietnam, on a father raising a daughter alone after losing his wife, on a grandfather witnessing the birth of 4 new lives and the rebirth of his daughter's strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. Just heard the news. Thomas in custody, you and Sarah and the babies safe. Thank God. When you're ready to talk about next steps, call me. The inheritance paperwork still needs your attention. The inheritance. In all the drama, I'd almost forgotten about the $450 million that had started this whole nightmare. Would it bring Sarah happiness, security, freedom? Or would it bring more Thomas Walshes into her life? More people seeing her as a target rather than a person? That would be Sarah's journey to navigate. But watching her tonight, how fiercely she protected her children, how cleverly she'd outmaneuvered Thomas, how bravely she'd faced each new challenge. I knew she was equal to whatever came next. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Jim, it's Frank. Heard they got him. Glad you and the family are safe. Some ghosts can finally rest now. Some ghosts, but not all. Song Tra would always be with me. But perhaps now, with the truth in the open between Sarah and me, that ghost could at least stop haunting my relationship with my daughter. As if sensing my thoughts, Sarah appeared in the doorway, Noah fussing quietly in her arms. Can't sleep? I asked softly. She shook her head. Too much adrenaline still. And this little man is hungry again. She settled into the chair across from me, adjusting Noah at her breast. What are you thinking about? Sitting here alone in the dark. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not just the exhausted new mother, not just the betrayed wife, but the extraordinary woman who had faced the worst life could throw at her and emerged stronger. I'm thinking about tomorrow, I said simply, and all the tomorrows after that. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Me too, Dad. Me too. But our peaceful moment was shattered by the sudden blaring of alarms throughout the building. Red emergency lights began flashing in the hallway. Noah started crying at the noise. What's happening? Sarah gasped, clutching the baby tighter. Agent Wilson burst into the room, his weapon drawn. Security breach, he said tersely. Multiple intruders. We need to move. Now. Sarah looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. Thomas? But how? Not Thomas. Wilson interrupted, already ushering us toward a back exit. Thomas is secure. This is someone else. Who? I demanded, helping Sarah gather the other 3 babies for where they slept. Wilson's face was grim in the red emergency light. Based on initial reports, Rebecca's family. And they're not here for Thomas. Then what do they want? Sarah asked, though I think we both already knew the answer. The babies, Wilson confirmed. They're claiming they're the legitimate heirs, Rebecca's children by her legal husband. And just like that, our nightmare began again. Get the babies, go back, Wilson ordered as alarms continued blaring around us. Emergency exit through the kitchen pantry. Move. Sarah clutched Noah to her chest with one arm while I gathered the other 3 infants, their tiny bodies warm and terrifyingly fragile against me. The weight of their lives, so new, so innocent, pressed on my heart like a physical burden. How could they be in danger again so soon? Who exactly is coming after us? I demanded as we hurried down a narrow hallway, the red emergency lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Rebecca has 5 brothers, Wilson explained tersely. Former military, private security contractors. They disabled 2 of our perimeter guards and breached the east entrance. They're claiming the quadruplets are legally their sister's children through her valid marriage to Thomas. Sarah's face hardened, even as she gently soothed Noah. That's insane. I gave birth to them. Family courts are complicated with surrogacy cases, Wilson replied, punching a code into a keypad beside what looked like an ordinary pantry door. And right now, they're not interested in legal arguments. They're here to take the babies by force. The door swung open to reveal not a pantry, but a steel-reinforced safe room with another door at the far end. This leads to an underground garage, Wilson explained. There's a vehicle waiting. Agent Ramirez will drive you to a new location. What about you? I asked, noticing he wasn't following us into the room. I need to coordinate the defense and get these intruders contained. His face was grim as he checked his weapon. We can't let them follow you. The implication was clear. He was staying behind, potentially putting himself in danger to protect our escape. Sarah must have realized this too, because she paused at the doorway. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Wilson nodded once, then closed the door behind us, the heavy locks clicking into place. The safe room was dimly lit by emergency lighting, eerily quiet after the chaos of the alarms. The babies, disturbed by the commotion, had begun to fuss, their tiny cries echoing in the confined space. It's okay, sweethearts, Sarah soothed, though her voice trembled slightly. Mommy's got you. You're safe. I shifted Ethan to my shoulder, patting his back gently while still balancing Emma and Lily in my other arm. We need to move quickly. Here, put the babies in the carriers. I nodded toward a table where 4 infant carriers had been prepared. As we hurriedly strapped the babies into their carriers, a muffled explosion rocked the building above us. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and Sarah looked up in alarm. What was that? Nothing good, I replied grimly. Let's go. We each grabbed 2 carriers and hurried through the second door, which opened into a small underground garage where a nondescript black SUV waited. A woman in tactical gear stood beside it. Agent Ramirez, I assumed. Quickly, she urged, helping us load the babies into the specially installed car seats in the back. We've got a 10-minute head start at most. Once the quadruplets were secured, Sarah and I climbed into the back seat with them, while Ramirez took the wheel. The garage door opened automatically as we approached, revealing a dimly lit tunnel that sloped upward. Where does this lead? Sarah asked, her hand protectively touching each baby in turn. Service road behind the building, Ramirez answered, accelerating smoothly. From there, we'll take back roads to the new safe house. It's a former government facility, completely off the grid. As we emerged from the tunnel onto a narrow road, another explosion lit up the night sky behind us. In the rearview mirror, I could see flames leaping from one wing of the building we just left. They're using serious firepower, Ramirez muttered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. These aren't amateurs. What about the agent still inside? Sarah asked, her voice tight with concern. Ramirez's face was grim in the dashboard light. Agent Wilson and his team are among the best. They'll hold them off as long as possible to give us time to get clear. We drove in tense silence for several minutes, Ramirez taking a complex route of back roads and service lanes, constantly checking the mirrors for signs of pursuit. The babies had settled somewhat, lulled by the motion of the car, though Ethan still whimpered softly. Just as I began to think we might have escaped cleanly, Ramirez cursed under her breath. We've got company. 2 vehicles, coming up fast behind us. I turned to look through the rear window and saw 2 black SUVs gaining on us, their headlights off, moving with aggressive precision. Can you lose them? I'm trying, she said, accelerating and taking a sharp turn onto an even narrower road. But they're good. Too good. Sarah reached across the babies to grasp my hand. Dad, if they catch us. They won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. And even if they do, they're not taking these children. Not while I'm breathing. Ramirez swerved again, this time onto what appeared to be an old logging road, rough and rutted. The SUV bounced violently, causing the babies to start crying in unison. Sorry, she called over the noise. I'm trying to find a lane they can't follow us through. But our pursuers were relentless, managing the difficult road almost as well as Ramirez. As they gained ground, I could make out multiple figures in each vehicle. How many? Ramirez asked, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. At least 8 men, I reported, possibly armed. She nodded grimly. There's a panic button under the center console. Press it. Sarah reached forward and found the small red button, pressing it firmly. What does that do? Sends our exact coordinates to every FBI field office within 100 miles and requests immediate tactical support, Ramirez explained. But it'll take time for them to reach us. Time we don't have. I observed as the lead pursuit vehicle pulled alongside us, trying to force us off the narrow road. Ramirez executed a brilliant defensive maneuver, dropping back suddenly, and then accelerating to ram the rear quarter panel of the other SUV, sending it skidding. Hold on, she shouted as she floored the accelerator, briefly pulling ahead. But our advantage was short-lived. The second vehicle caught up, and this time a man leaned out the passenger window, pointing what looked like a rifle at our tires. Get down, Ramirez yelled, swerving violently, just as the crack of gunfire split the night. Our SUV lurched sickeningly as a tire blew out, the vehicle suddenly much harder to control. Ramirez fought the wheel, trying to keep us on the road, but a second shot took out another tire. We slid sideways, heading toward the ditch. Brace yourselves, Ramirez shouted as we left the road, plowing into underbrush and finally coming to a jarring halt against a tree. The impact was less violent than I'd feared. The vehicle's safety systems had deployed perfectly, but the babies were screaming now, terrified by the noise and motion. Sarah immediately began checking them for injuries while I assessed our situation. Ramirez was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but already had her weapon drawn. Stay in the vehicle, she ordered, unbuckling her seatbelt. I'll try to hold them off until backup arrives. You can't face 8 armed men alone, I protested. Her smile was grim. Watch me. Before I could argue further, she was out of the car, taking cover behind the hood and aiming toward the approaching vehicles, which had stopped about 50 yards away. Men were deploying from them, using the SUVs as cover, weapons visible in the moonlight. FBI, Ramirez shouted. Drop your weapons and stand down. Their answer came in the form of gunfire, bullets pinging off the armored body of our vehicle. Ramirez returned fire, her shots measured and precise. Inside the SUV, I looked at Sarah, who was doing her best to comfort the screaming babies while keeping them below window level. We need a plan, I said urgently. Ramirez can't hold them off forever. Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. The forest, she said, nodding toward the dense trees behind us. If we can get deep enough in, they'll have trouble finding us in the dark. It was risky. 4 crying infants would not move silently through the woods, but staying put was even more dangerous. Okay, I agreed. But we need a distraction. Looking around the vehicle, I spotted a small first aid kit and emergency flares in the cargo area. An idea formed in my mind, desperate, but potentially effective. When I give the signal, I told Sarah, take the babies and head straight into the trees. Don't stop, don't look back, just keep moving as quietly as you can. What are you going to do? She asked, fear evident in her voice. Create a diversion, I said, gathering the flares and checking to make sure all 4 babies were securely strapped in their carriers for easy transport. Something to keep their attention on the car while you get away. Sarah's eyes widened. Dad, no. It's not up for discussion. I cut her off. Those are my grandchildren, and you are my daughter. There is nothing I wouldn't do to protect you all. Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. Be careful, Dad. Please. Always am, I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. When a shooting stops, that's your cue to move. I made my way to the rear door of the SUV, crouching low to stay out of sight. Ramirez was still exchanging fire with the attackers, but her shots were becoming less frequent. She was likely running low on ammunition. Taking a deep breath, I prepared the flares, then cracked open the door on the side away from the gunman. The sounds of the firefight masked the noise as I slipped out and belly crawled toward the back of the SUV. Ramirez, I called softly when I was positioned behind the rear tire. I need covering fire on my mark. She glanced back, clearly surprised to see me outside the vehicle. What the hell are you doing? Creating a diversion so Sarah and the babies can escape into the woods, I explained quickly. When I ignite these flares, pour everything you've got at them. Make them keep their heads down for at least 30 seconds. She looked skeptical but nodded. You're either very brave or very crazy, old man. Bit of both, I admitted. Ready now. I struck all 3 flares at once, their brilliant red light illuminating the scene like daylight, then hurled them in different directions toward our attackers. Simultaneously, Ramirez emptied her magazine in a barrage of suppressing fire. The effect was instantaneous. The gunman ducked for cover, momentarily blinded by the sudden light and confused by the multiple threat directions. In that moment of chaos, I saw Sarah slip out the far side of the SUV, her baby carriers somehow distributed between her arms, and disappear into the darkness of the forest. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by resolve. Now I needed to keep these men focused on the SUV long enough for Sarah to get deep into the woods. Good luck, Ramirez said as she reloaded her final magazine. What now? Now, I said grimly. We make as much noise as possible. For the next few minutes, Ramirez and I created a convincing illusion that the SUV was still fully occupied. I called out directions as if speaking to Sarah, shuffled around inside the vehicle, even used a baby blanket to create a silhouette against the window that might be mistaken for someone holding an infant. The gunmen maintained their positions, occasionally firing at the SUV, but seeming hesitant to approach directly. I suspected they had orders to capture rather than kill. They wanted the babies alive, after all. My ammunition's almost gone, Ramirez warned after about 10 minutes of our charade. I nodded. Sarah should have enough of a head start by now. How long until backup arrives? She checked her watch. 15 minutes at the earliest. We won't last that long. Then we need to change tactics. I looked around, assessing our options. Can you create one more distraction? Something big enough that I can circle around behind them. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you planning? Those men came for my grandchildren, I said, my voice hard. I'm going to make sure they regret that decision. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. The SUV has a self-destruct protocol. Emergency measure for vehicles carrying high-value assets or witnesses. I can trigger it remotely once I'm clear. You mean blow it up? I asked, surprised. Not quite that dramatic. It'll start a controlled burn in the engine compartment. Impressive looking, but designed not to cause a major explosion. It should create enough smoke and confusion for us to maneuver. Do it, I decided. I'll head right, you go left. Meet at the rear of their position. We slipped away from the SUV, staying low and using the darkness as cover. When we were about 30 yards out, Ramirez pressed a button on her watch. Moments later, the front of our vehicle burst into flames, thick smoke billowing upward. The distraction worked. The gunman's attention fixed on the burning SUV, several of them advancing cautiously to check for survivors. In the confusion, Ramirez and I managed to circle behind their position, approaching their vehicles from the rear. Take the driver, Ramirez whispered as we crouched behind one of their SUVs. A man sat behind the wheel, apparently serving as lookout while the others investigated our burning vehicle. I nodded, gathering myself for what needed to be done. At Ramirez's signal, we moved simultaneously, she taking down the driver of the first vehicle with a precise blow to the temple, while I opened the door of the second SUV and dragged the startled driver out, a hand over his mouth to muffle any shout. Make a sound, and it's your last, I growled in his ear, applying pressure to his carotid artery until he went limp. Ramirez was already disabling the first vehicle, removing essential components from under the hood with practiced efficiency. I moved to join her at the second SUV, but froze when I heard a shout from the direction of our burning vehicle. They're gone. The babies aren't here. The men who had been investigating our SUV were now running back toward their vehicles, weapons raised. Ramirez and I took cover behind the nearest SUV. Change of plans, she muttered. We need to slow them down more permanently. Before I could ask what she meant, Ramirez stood up and called out in a commanding voice. Federal agent, drop your weapons or we start shooting your vehicles. Her bold move caught them by surprise, causing momentary hesitation. Enough time for me to grab the hunting rifle I'd spotted in the back seat of one of their SUVs. I wasn't the marksman I once had been, but at this range, I couldn't miss. I took aim at the nearest vehicle's engine block and fired. The shot echoed through the forest, followed by the hiss of radiator fluid leaking onto the hot engine. Ramirez had drawn her weapon again, keeping the men pinned down while I disabled the second vehicle as well. Fall back, she ordered, already moving deeper into the woods in the opposite direction from where Sarah had gone. We need to lead them away from the others. I followed her lead, making sure to leave obvious signs of our passage, broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, anything to make these men believe they were following the right trail. Behind us, I could hear angry voices and the crackling of the still-burning SUV. They're following, I confirmed as we pushed deeper into the forest, away from Sarah and the babies. But they'll figure out the deception eventually. We just need to buy time, Ramirez replied, checking her watch. Backup should be getting close now. We continued our retreat for another 10 minutes, deliberately leaving a trail, but staying just out of sight of our pursuers. The sounds of their pursuit gradually faded, suggesting they had either given up or split their forces. I don't like this, Ramirez muttered as we paused to catch our breath in a small clearing. They're too good to lose us that easily. I nodded in agreement, every sense on high alert. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. The attack came without warning, a figure dropping from a tree branch above us, tackling Ramirez to the ground before she could raise her weapon. Another man emerged from the shadows directly in front of me, moving with the silent precision of someone with military training. I swung the rifle like a club, catching my attacker across the face and sending him staggering backward. Ramirez was wrestling with her assailant, her smaller frame at a disadvantage against his greater weight and strength. Where are the babies? Her attacker demanded, pinning her arms. Tell us now, and no one gets hurt. Federal agent, she gasped. You're making a big mistake. I moved to help her, but my own attacker had recovered, and now 2 more men stepped from the trees surrounding us. One of them, taller than the others with a military-style buzz cut, appeared to be the leader. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. My name is Dominic Allen. I believe you have my sister's children. Your sister has no children, I replied coldly. Those babies belong to my daughter. His expression hardened. Rebecca and Thomas were legally married 3 years before he met your daughter. Under the law, any children born during that marriage are presumed to be theirs. That's not how biology works. I shot back. Sarah carried those babies. She gave birth to them. They are hers. Surrogacy agreements are complicated, he said, sounding for all the world like he was discussing a business contract rather than the lives of 4 infants. Rebecca agreed to let your daughter carry her and Thomas's children. That was the arrangement. There was no arrangement, I insisted. Thomas lied to both women. He's a con man, a bigamist, possibly worse. Dominic's expression didn't change. That's for the courts to decide. In the meantime, those children belong with their legal mother. You're not taking them through the courts, Ramirez spat, still struggling against her captor. You're trying to kidnap them at gunpoint. After your agency refused to acknowledge Rebecca's rights and hid the children from her. Dominic countered. We're simply retrieving what's legally hers. I studied the man, recognizing the dangerous combination of absolute certainty and military training. He truly believed he was right, that he was rescuing his sister's children, not kidnapping them. Your sister has been misled, I said, trying a different approach. Thomas Walsh is a career criminal. He's conned multiple women, stolen identities, committed fraud. He's currently in federal custody, facing decades in prison. A flicker of doubt crossed Dominic's face. Rebecca said he was being framed. By whom? For what purpose? I pressed. Thing, man. Why would the FBI invent elaborate charges against him? Before he could respond, the distant sound of helicopter rotors cut through the night. Backup was finally arriving. Dominic glanced up, then made a quick hand signal to his men. This isn't over, he told me. Those children are coming home to their mother. You're right about one thing, I agreed. This isn't over. He and his men melted back into the forest just as searchlights from the helicopter began sweeping the area. Ramirez immediately pulled out a signal flare and fired it into the sky, marking our position. Are you hurt? She asked, checking me for injuries. Nothing serious, I assured her, though every muscle in my aging body ached from the night's exertion. We need to find Sarah and the babies. Ramirez nodded, activating a tracking device on her watch. The carriers have GPS trackers built in. They're about half a mile northwest of here. Within minutes, the helicopter had landed in a nearby clearing, disgorging a tactical team led by Agent Wilson himself, sporting a bandage on his arm, but otherwise unharmed. Ramirez, Miller, he greeted us with visible relief. Status: operational, Ramirez reported crisply. The Allen team has withdrawn temporarily, but they're still in the area. Mrs. Walsh and the infants are approximately half a mile northwest according to tracker signals. Wilson nodded. Split up. Team 1 with me to secure Mrs. Walsh and the children. Team 2 with Ramirez to sweep the area for hostiles. Move out. I fell in with Wilson's team, pushing my tired body to keep pace as we moved through the forest towards Sarah's location. The GPS led us to a small rocky outcropping where Sarah had taken shelter, the 4 baby carriers arranged inside a natural alcove in the rock. She had one hand on her sleeping babies and a large branch gripped in the other, ready to defend them against any threat. Dad, she cried when she saw me, dropping the makeshift weapon and throwing her arms around me. I was so worried. I'm fine, I assured her, holding her tight. And you did exactly right. You kept the babies safe. Wilson's team quickly secured the area while a medic checked the infants, confirming they were unharmed despite their adventure. Within minutes, we were being escorted to the helicopter, the babies secured in special harnesses for the flight. Where are we going now? Sarah asked as we lifted off, the forest falling away beneath us. A secure military installation. Wilson replied over the headset. No civilian access, full perimeter security, medical facilities on site. You'll be completely safe there. Sarah nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. And Rebecca? Her brothers. We'll handle them, Wilson assured her. Now that we know who we're dealing with, we can take appropriate countermeasures. As the helicopter sped through the night sky, Sarah leaned against me, her head on my shoulder like when she was a child. Does it ever end, Dad? She whispered. Will we ever just be able to live our lives without looking over our shoulders? I stroked her hair gently, watching the sleeping faces of my grandchildren, so peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. Yes, I promised her. This will end, and you will have your life back. All of you. But even as I spoke the words, I couldn't shake the cold certainty that Dominic Allen wasn't a man who gave up easily. His type never did. And the determination I'd seen in his eyes told me one unassailable truth. This conflict was far from over. In fact, the real battle was just beginning. The military installation turned out to be an old Air Force base repurposed for government use. All concrete walls and security checkpoints, surrounded by miles of fencing topped with razor wire. It wasn't pretty, but it was safe. And after the events of the past week, safety mattered more than aesthetics. We were given a 2-bedroom apartment in what had once been officers' quarters. It was sparse but functional, with a small living area, kitchenette, and most importantly, a nursery already equipped with 4 cribs and everything the babies would need. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to make this feel as homey as possible under the circumstances. Sarah settled the quadruplets into their new cribs while I sat heavily on the couch, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving me feeling every one of my 72 years. My knees ached from the running. My back protested the awkward positions I'd maintained during our escape, and a dull throbbing had taken up residence behind my right eye. You should rest, Dad, Sarah said gently, returning from the nursery. You look exhausted. I smiled wearily. Speak for yourself. When was the last time you slept for more than an hour? She sank down beside me, rubbing her eyes. I can't even remember. Before the babies were born, I think. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The quiet hum of the air conditioning and the occasional soft sound from the nursery, the only interruptions. It felt strangely normal, as if we were just any family with newborns, tired but content. Agent Wilson wants to meet with us in the morning, Sarah finally said, to discuss our options going forward. I nodded. Good. It's time we move from reacting to acting. What do you think they'll suggest? Witness protection, probably, I replied honestly. New identities, new location, starting over somewhere Thomas and the Allens can never find us. Sarah's face fell. That sounds so final. Like we'd be running forever. It would keep you and the babies safe, I pointed out. She was quiet for a moment, then shook her head firmly. No, I don't want my children growing up looking over their shoulders, never knowing who they really are. There has to be another way. Before I could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Agent Wilson entered, looking almost as tired as we felt, but with an air of controlled energy that suggested important developments. Sorry to disturb you, he said, taking the chair across from us. But I thought you want to know immediately. We've arrested Rebecca Allen. Sarah straightened. On what charges? Conspiracy to kidnap, for starters, Wilson replied. Plus lying to federal agents, obstruction of justice, and potentially more as the investigation continues. Her brothers are still at large, but we have bolos out for all of them. Will the charges stick? I asked, knowing full well how easily good lawyers could dismantle seemingly solid cases. Wilson's expression was carefully neutral. That's where things get complicated. Rebecca is claiming she truly believed she had a legal right to the children. She's produced a document purporting to be a surrogacy agreement between her, Thomas, and Sarah. What? Sarah exclaimed. That's impossible. I never signed any surrogacy agreement. We know, Wilson assured her. The document is clearly fraudulent. The signatures don't match. The notary doesn't exist. But it shows they were planning this for some time, creating a paper trail to support their claims. I leaned forward. So what happens now? That's what I wanted to discuss, Wilson said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Rebecca has offered to cooperate fully in exchange for leniency. She claims she can provide evidence that Thomas has committed even more serious crimes than we initially suspected. What kind of crimes? Sarah asked. Wilson hesitated. Money laundering on an international scale. Identity theft across multiple states. And he paused, clearly reluctant to continue. And what? I prompted. An involvement in the deaths of at least 2 previous wives before he met either Sarah or Rebecca. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, their implication too horrifying to immediately process. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. Killed them, she whispered. According to Rebecca, yes, Wilson confirmed. She claimed she discovered evidence accidentally and confronted him. He allegedly convinced her it was self-defense in one case and an accident in the other, but she remained suspicious. And yet she stayed with him. I noted, skepticism evident in my voice. Wilson nodded grimly. She says she was afraid to leave, that she played along while gathering evidence to protect herself. Whether that's true or just a convenient story now that she's facing charges. He shrugged. That's for a jury to decide. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing the small living room. So Thomas isn't just a con man and a bigamist. He's potentially a murderer, and he's the father of my children. Her voice broke on the last words. I rose to comfort her, but she waved me away. I'm fine. I just need a minute to process this. Wilson watched her with sympathy. There's more you should know. Rebecca has agreed to sign away any claim to the quadruplets in exchange for consideration in her sentencing. She admits she has no biological connection to them. For the first time in days, I saw genuine relief cross Sarah's face. So it's over? She's not going to fight for custody anymore. She's not, Wilson confirmed. But her brothers are another matter. Dominic in particular seems convinced that Rebecca is being coerced into giving up her children. He's hired attorneys who are preparing to challenge the validity of both marriages and file for custody on Rebecca's behalf, claiming she's signing away rights under duress. The momentary relief vanished from Sarah's expression. So we're back where we started. Not exactly, Wilson corrected. With Rebecca cooperating, we have a much stronger legal position. And there's something else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Rebecca gave us this. It contains recordings of conversations between her and Thomas over the past year. In several of them, He explicitly discusses his plan regarding Sarah. What plan? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Wilson's expression darkened. Thomas Walsh has a pattern. He marries wealthy women, isolates them from family and friends, then engineers their deaths in ways that appear accidental, leaving him to inherit their fortunes. Sarah sank back onto the couch, her face pale. He was going to kill me. According to these recordings, yes, Wilson confirmed gently. The plan was to wait until after the babies were born, establish himself as a devoted father, then arrange an accident once you'd updated your will to include him. But something went wrong, I surmised. The quadruplets instead of a single baby. Wilson nodded. Multiple births complicated things. More attention from doctors, nurses, family. Too many witnesses. So he adapted his plan. Abandoned Sarah at the hospital. Create a narrative of her being unstable and overwhelmed. Fight for custody while positioning himself as the concerned father. And then what? Sarah asked quietly. If he had won custody. Based on the recordings, he would have hired a nanny, placed the children with Rebecca to raise, and returned to Sarah, claiming he'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to reconcile. Wilson's voice was clinically detached, but his eyes showed his disgust. Once back in the house, he would have proceeded with the original plan, Sarah's accidental death, complete control of her inheritance as the children's father and guardian. The room fell silent as we absorbed the full horror of Thomas's intentions. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice steadier than I expected. So now we have proof he planned to murder me for my inheritance. That should be enough to put him away forever, right? It's strong evidence, Wilson agreed. Combined with Rebecca's testimony about the previous wives, we believe we can secure a conviction for conspiracy to commit murder at minimum, possibly the previous murders as well, if we can reopen those investigations successfully. But that doesn't solve our immediate problem, I pointed out. Dominic Allen and his brothers are still out there, still determined to take the babies. Correct, Wilson acknowledged. Which brings me to why I came tonight, instead of waiting until morning. We have intelligence suggesting the Allen brothers are planning something significant. Their military backgrounds and connections give them resources most civilians don't have access to. What kind of something significant? Sarah asked, alarm edging her voice. We're not sure, Wilson admitted, but we're taking no chances. I've ordered enhanced security protocols for this facility, and we're preparing to move you again if necessary. No, Sarah said firmly. No more running. No more hiding. She stood up straight, a new resolve hardening her features. These men need to understand they can't just take my children. I want to end this, Agent Wilson, permanently. Wilson studied her for a moment. What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Walsh? A trap, she said simply. Similar to what we did with Thomas, but bigger. Let Dominic think he has an opportunity to grab the babies. But instead of catching just him, we catch all of them, with enough evidence to put them away for decades. I stared at my daughter in amazement. The timid, broken woman from the hospital now seemed a distant memory. In her place stood someone stronger, harder, forged in the crucible of these past terrible days. It's risky, Wilson cautioned. Everything about this situation is risky, Sarah countered. But I'm done letting these people dictate how my family lives. It's time we took control. Over the next 2 hours, the three of us outlined a plan that was either brilliant or insane, depending on one's perspective. By the time Wilson left, the basic structure was in place. We would leak information about a medical appointment for the quadruplets at a civilian hospital, suggesting a temporary reduction in security that the Allen brothers couldn't resist. Are you sure about this? I asked Sarah after Wilson departed to begin preparations. It's dangerous. She looked toward the nursery where her babies slept, blissfully unaware of the storm surrounding them. I've never been more sure of anything, she said quietly. I need to end this, Dad. For them. So they can grow up without this shadow hanging over them. I pulled her into a hug. This remarkable daughter of mine who had endured so much yet somehow grown stronger through it all. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Your mother would be too. She clung to me for a moment, allowing herself this brief vulnerability before pulling back with a determined smile. Get some rest, Dad. Tomorrow we fight back. The following days were a blur of preparation. FBI tactical teams rehearsed every aspect of the operation. Hospital security was briefed and enhanced. The leak was carefully planted through channels the Allens were known to monitor. Every detail was checked and rechecked until Wilson was satisfied we had accounted for every contingency. And through it all, Sarah remained calm, focused, spending every spare moment with her babies, soaking in their smiles and coos as if storing up memories to sustain her through whatever came next. The day of the operation dawned clear and cool, a perfect fall morning. Sarah dressed the quadruplets in matching outfits, her hands steady as she prepared them for what would hopefully be the final battle in this war for their future. "Ready?" I asked as we loaded the babies into their carriers. She nodded, her expression serene but determined. More than ready. The drive to the hospital proceeded according to plan. Our convoy, deliberately more modest than previous security details to maintain the illusion of reduced protection, arrived at the medical center at precisely 10 a.m. Agents disguised as medical staff helped us unload the babies and escort us through a side entrance to a suite of rooms on the second floor. Everything looked normal, routine, but I knew the truth. Every doctor, every nurse, every janitor in this section of the hospital was actually a federal agent. Snipers were positioned on adjacent buildings. Tactical teams waited in hidden locations throughout the facility. The trap was set. As we settled into the examination room with its 4 small bassinets, Sarah took my hand. "It's going to work, Dad," she said with quiet confidence. "I can feel it." I squeezed her fingers. "I know, sweetheart. Just remember the plan. When the alarm sounds, I take the babies into the safe room and lock the door," she finished. "I won't take any chances with their safety." Wilson entered, dressed as a doctor complete with white coat and stethoscope. "We have movement," he reported quietly. 3 vehicles approaching from the south parking structure. Facial recognition confirms Dominic Allen and at least 4 of his brothers. Sarah nodded calmly. "Good. Let them come." I marveled at her composure. The Sarah who had sobbed in her hospital bed after Thomas abandoned her seemed to belong to another lifetime. This woman, this mother, radiated a quiet, implacable strength that reminded me of warriors I'd known in another life. There in the building, Wilson updated us, listening to his earpiece. Moving through the west stairwell. 2 minutes out. "Dad," Sarah said suddenly, "if anything happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen," I interrupted firmly. "If it does," she insisted, "promise me you'll take care of them. Raise them to know who they are, where they came from. Tell them their mother fought for them with everything she had." I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my throat. "I promise. But it won't come to that." Wilson's hand went to his earpiece again. "They're splitting up. 3 approaching this floor, 2 continuing upward, probably checking for additional security or looking for alternate routes. Standard tactical approach," I noted. "They're being careful." "Not careful enough," Wilson replied grimly. "Teams are in position to intercept both groups on my command." The next moments stretched into an eternity as we waited. The only sounds in the room the soft gurgles of the babies and the steady tick of the wall clock. Then Wilson tensed. "They've neutralized our guard at the corridor entrance," he whispered. "Moving toward this room now." Sarah immediately gathered the babies' carriers, ready to move them to the adjoining safe room at the first signal. I positioned myself between her and the door, my body responding to muscle memories from half a century ago. The door handle turned slowly, then stopped. A moment later, a device slid under the door, small, cylindrical, with blinking lights. "Stun grenade," Wilson shouted. "Cover." Everything happened at once. Wilson kicked the device back into the hallway as Sarah rushed the babies into the safe room. I dived behind an examination table, just as a muffled bang echoed from the corridor, followed by the sound of splintering wood as the door was kicked open. 3 men in tactical gear burst in, weapons raised. Wilson, protected by body armor beneath his doctor's coat, engaged the first one while I tackled the second, driving him into a supply cabinet with all my strength. The third man moved directly toward the safe room, where Sarah had disappeared with the babies. "FBI, freeze!" shouted voices from a hallway as the first wave of agents poured in. But the third intruder was already at the safe room door, attaching something to the electronic lock. I struggled with my opponent, feeling the disadvantage of age against his younger strength. But decades of pent-up rage and fear for my family gave me a desperate power, and I managed to slam his head against the cabinet hard enough to momentarily stun him. Breaking free, I lunged toward the man at the safe room door, but I was too late. Whatever device he'd attached had worked. The door swung open, and he disappeared inside. "Sarah," I shouted, scrambling to my feet and rushing toward the room, only to freeze at the threshold. Inside, Sarah stood against the far wall, the 4 baby carriers arranged on the floor before her. But she wasn't cowering in fear. Instead, she held a standard-issue FBI sidearm, pointed steadily at the intruder, who had likewise frozen in surprise. "One more step toward my children," Sarah said, her voice deadly calm, "and I will put a bullet through your head." The man, Dominic Allen, I now recognized despite the tactical gear, slowly raised his hands. "You won't shoot me," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're not a killer." "I'm a mother," Sarah corrected him, her aim unwavering. "That's far more dangerous." Behind me, agents had subdued the other intruders. Wilson appeared at my side, his own weapon trained on Dominic. "It's over, Allen. Your brothers have been captured. The building is surrounded." For a moment, I thought Dominic might try something desperate anyway. But then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "We were only trying to protect our sister's children," he said quietly. "They were never her children," Sarah replied, finally lowering the gun as agents moved in to handcuff Dominic. And deep down, I think she always knew that. The aftermath was mercifully anticlimactic. All 5 Allen brothers were taken into custody without further incident. The Quadruplets, undisturbed by the commotion, continued their naps as if nothing unusual had occurred. Sarah allowed the gun to be taken from her hands, then sat down heavily in a chair, the adrenaline finally wearing off. "You did it," I said, kneeling beside her. "It's over, Sarah. Really over." She nodded, tears filling her eyes, not of fear or sadness, but simple relief. "They're safe," she whispered. "My babies are safe." Wilson returned after overseeing the removal of the prisoners. "The operation was a complete success," he reported. "All targets in custody, no injuries to any of our personnel." He smiled at Sarah. "Though I'm curious when you learn to handle a firearm like that." "Agent Ramirez gave me a crash course yesterday," Sarah admitted. "She thought I should be able to protect myself, just in case." "Remind me to give her a commendation," Wilson said dryly. "Your stance was perfect." Later that evening, back in our temporary apartment at the military base, Sarah and I sat watching the babies play on a blanket spread across the living room floor. They were becoming more alert every day, their tiny personalities beginning to emerge. Noah serious and observant, Emma demanding and vocal, Lily quiet but determined, Ethan curious about everything. "So what happens now?" I asked as Sarah gently tickled Ethan's tummy, eliciting a gurgling laugh. "Now we start living," she said simply. "No more running, no more hiding." She picked up Noah, who had begun to fuss. "Agent Wilson says we can return to normal life once the Allen brothers are formally charged. Thomas's trial won't be for months, and by then we'll have proper security in place at a new home. Have you thought about where that might be?" I asked, thinking of the millions of dollars sitting untouched in her accounts, the limitless possibilities suddenly available to her. Sarah looked thoughtful. "I was thinking somewhere quiet. A small town, maybe, with good schools and friendly neighbors. A place where 4 kids can run around in a big yard, climb trees, have a normal childhood." "That sounds perfect," I agreed. "And what about you? What do you want for yourself?" She smiled, looking down at the babies with a mother's love. "I want to raise my children, watch them grow, maybe go back to architecture part-time when they're older." She glanced up at me. "And I want you there with us, Dad. Not just visiting on weekends or holidays, but living with us, being part of their everyday lives." Emotion welled up in my throat. "I like that very much." "Good," she said decisively, "because they're going to need their grandfather to teach them all the things I can't. How to fish, how to stand up for what's right, how to be brave even when you're terrified." "I think you got that last one covered," I observed with pride. "You're the bravest person I know, Sarah." She shook her head. "I just did what any mother would do. What mom would have done." At the mention of Jean, a comfortable silence fell between us. For so long, memories of my late wife had been tinged with sadness, with all the things she had missed. But now, watching our daughter with her children, I felt Jean's presence as a blessing rather than an absence. The quiet was broken by a knock at the door. Agent Wilson entered, his face unusually animated with what appeared to be excitement. "I have news," he announced without preamble. "Rebecca Allen has provided information that led us to Thomas's hidden financial records. We've uncovered accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore containing nearly $30 million. Money from his previous victims?" Sarah asked. Wilson nodded. "Among other illegal activities. But here's the important part. We've traced transactions linking him directly to the deaths of his previous wives. Financial trails showing purchases of specific medications, payments to individuals who later provided him with alibis, life insurance policies taken out just months before each death. So you can prove he's a murderer," I said. "Beyond any reasonable doubt," Wilson confirmed. "The prosecutor is preparing murder charges as we speak. Thomas Walsh will never see the outside of a prison again." Sarah's expression was complex, relief mixed with sadness, closure tinged with regret. "I almost feel sorry for him," she said softly. Wilson and I both stared at her in surprise. "To live like that," she explained. "So empty inside that money means more than human life. Never knowing real love or connection. What a wasteland his soul must be." Her compassion, even after everything Thomas had done, reminded me yet again of the extraordinary woman my daughter had become. Not despite the challenges she'd faced, but because of them, each hardship adding another layer of strength, another dimension of wisdom. Wilson left us with assurances that Thomas's prosecution would move forward swiftly and that the Allen brothers were facing significant federal charges with no possibility of bail. For the first time since Thomas had walked out of that hospital room, our future looked secure. As night fell, Sarah prepared the babies for bed, singing softly as she moved from crib to crib in their nursery. I stood in the doorway watching, my heart full of a peace I hadn't felt in decades. "You know," I said when she had finished and we retreated to the living room, "your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled his inheritance. Not just the money, but the responsibility that comes with it." Sarah smiled. "I've barely touched the money yet." "That's exactly what I mean," I said. "Most people would have been overwhelmed, made rash decisions. But you've kept your focus on what really matters, those 4 little lives in there." She was quiet for a moment, contemplative. "The money doesn't define us, does it, Dad? It doesn't change who we are at heart." "No," I agreed. "It just gives you more options for your future. Your character, that was formed long before you knew about any inheritance. By you and Mom," she said softly. "You gave me the only inheritance that truly matters. Love, strength, values." As we sat together in the quiet apartment, the past weeks of terror and uncertainty seemed to fall away, leaving behind a deeper appreciation for the simple gift of family. Sarah had faced the worst and emerged not just whole, but somehow more herself than before. Thomas had abandoned her at what should have been her happiest moment, unaware of the financial fortune she had just inherited. But in doing so, he had inadvertently given her something far more valuable: the discovery of her own immeasurable strength, the fierce power of maternal love, and the unshakable knowledge that she could face anything life threw at her. In the end, the true inheritance wasn't the millions in her bank accounts. It was the legacy of resilience she would pass on to her 4 beautiful children, a legacy worth more than all the money in the world. 6 months later, we stood on the porch of a sprawling farmhouse nestled among rolling hills in a small town far from the chaos we had left behind. The Quadruplets, now crawling and babbling, played in a custom-built playpen while Sarah and I sipped coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Thomas was serving consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. The Allen brothers had accepted plea deals ranging from 15 to 25 years. Rebecca, in exchange for her cooperation, had received a reduced sentence of 5 years, along with mandatory psychiatric treatment. The inheritance had been secured, placed in trust for the Quadruplets' future with Sarah as sole trustee. A portion had been set aside for a foundation supporting single mothers of multiples, Sarah's way of creating something positive from her ordeal. "Friend," Sarah said to the dawning day, her voice peaceful, "thank you for listening to our story. It's not an easy one, but it's ours, and we've learned to embrace even the hardest parts of it." I smiled at this habit she developed, speaking to an imaginary friend, a witness to our journey. The therapist said it was her way of processing everything that had happened, giving narrative shape to chaos. You know, she continued, turning to face me, life can change in an instant. One moment you're anticipating a joyful future, and the next, everything falls apart. But here's what I learned. When everything falls apart, that's when you discover what you're truly made of. From inside the house came the sound of one of the babies crying. Lily, from the pitch of it. Sarah set down her coffee cup. That's my cue, she said with a smile. Being needed is the greatest blessing of all, isn't it? As she went inside, I remained on the porch, watching the day brighten across our new homeland. At 72, I had been given an unexpected second chance. Not just to be a grandfather, but to be an everyday presence in the lives of 4 extraordinary children and their even more extraordinary mother. Friend, I said quietly, adopting Sarah's habit, if you stayed with us through this whole story, through all the darkness and pain, then you understand something important about life. It's not the setbacks that define us, but how we rise after falling. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the pleasant warmth of the rising sun on my face. If our story has touched you in any way, if you see something of your own struggles reflected in ours, then do me one small favor. Subscribe to this channel. Join our community of survivors and thrivers. Because stories like ours deserve to be shared, and people like you deserve to know they're not alone in their battles. Inside, I could hear Sarah singing to the babies, her voice clear and strong. Life wasn't perfect. We still had security precautions, still jumped sometimes at unexpected noises, still carried the scars of what we'd endured. But we were whole. We were together. We were home. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all.